He is the man whose arrival was seen not as a conquest, but as an apocalypse, a punishment sent by God himself. When his armies appeared on the horizon, they were a tide of hoofbeats and black banners, a storm that washed over continents and erased entire civilizations from the face of the earth. In their wake, they left only ruins, mountains of human skulls, and rivers of blood. Chroniclers of the age, men who struggled to find words for the horror they witnessed, wrote that his soldiers didn't just kill, they annihilated. They slaughtered millions, not merely as a tactic of war, but as a systematic act of terror designed to break the human spirit. Welcome to history's Chronicles of Horror. Tonight, we stare into the abyss of the 13th century, into the story of Genghis Khan, the architect of the largest contiguous land empire in all of human history. But to label him a simple monster is to miss the terrifying complexity of the man. The story of the warlord who unleashed this nightmare is riddled with paradox. This same man, this butcher of nations, presided over an empire with a revolutionary legal code. He forged laws that, according to later accounts, banned the kidnapping and trafficking of women. He made adultery a crime punishable by death to stop the feuds that tore his people apart. He established a system of broad religious tolerance that was almost unthinkable in a world constantly at war over faith. And under his shadow, he built an empire that, for a time, made the world smaller and more connected than it had ever been. So, who was the real Genghis Khan? Was he the bloodthirsty tyrant of legend, a man who orchestrated punitive massacres on a scale that still chills the soul? Or was he a visionary leader, a lawgiver whose ideas on society and governance were centuries ahead of his time? The truth is a deeply unsettling paradox. And to understand the man, we must first confront the monster. The story of the man who would one day command the most feared army on the planet begins not in a palace, but on the harsh, unforgiving steppes of Mongolia. The exact year is lost to history, but sometime around 1162, a boy was born and given the name Temujin. His childhood was not one of privilege, it was a desperate, relentless struggle for survival. The world he was born into was a chaotic patchwork of warring nomadic tribes, a brutal landscape where life was cheap and tomorrow was never guaranteed. His father, Yasuge, was a minor clan chief, but that title offered little protection. When Temujin was just a boy, his father was murdered poisoned by a rival Tatar clan, a bitter enemy. In an instant, Temujin's world shattered. His own clan, seeing no value in a widow and her young children, did the unthinkable. They abandoned them. Cast out, left to die Temujin, his mother Holan, and his siblings were forced to survive alone in the vast, cruel wilderness. They hunted rats to eat. They foraged for roots. They lived a life of constant, gnawing poverty. This period of suffering was a crucible. It forged in the young Temujin a will of pure iron and a terrifyingly clear understanding of power. He learned that loyalty was the only currency that mattered, and betrayal was a sin that could only be answered with death. He learned that weakness was an invitation to be devoured, and that the only real security in this world was absolute strength. These were lessons written in hunger, fear, and blood. The defining crisis of his young life, the event that would ignite the fire of his ambition, came when his new wife, Bard, was abducted by the rival Merkit tribe. It was a raid born of old feuds, a grimly common practice on the steppes. But for Temujin, this was an unforgivable violation, a profound humiliation. He spent months consumed by a single purpose: rescuing Bard. He called in old debts, forged new, dangerous alliances, and slowly gathered the men he would need. When he finally led his force to attack the Merkit camp and reclaimed his wife, it wasn't just a rescue mission, it was a declaration. It was the moment Temujin, the outcast, began his transformation into a leader of men, The monster was being born. He had a magnetic, almost supernatural ability to attract followers. He rewarded loyalty with ferocious generosity but valued skill and merit above all else, a revolutionary idea in a world obsessed with aristocratic bloodlines. He promoted his generals based on what they could do on the battlefield, not who their fathers were. This created an officer corps that was ruthlessly efficient and fanatically loyal to him and him alone. Over the next 2 decades, Temujin navigated the treacherous currents of steppe politics with a masterful blend of diplomacy, cunning, and raw savage force. He hunted down and destroyed his rivals one by one. The Tatars who had poisoned his father, the Merkits who had stolen his wife, and the powerful Naimans who stood as the final obstacle to his absolute dominion. In a decisive battle against the Naimans in 1204, one famous story claims he ordered each of his soldiers to light 5 fires, creating the illusion of an unstoppable demonic horde that broke his enemy's morale before the fighting even began. After this victory, his supremacy was undeniable. In the year 1206, a great assembly, was called. The chieftains of all the Mongol tribes, now united under his banner, gathered on the steppe and proclaimed Temujin their supreme leader. They gave him a new name, a title that would echo through eternity: Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. He had achieved the impossible. He had taken the fractious, warring nomads of Mongolia and forged them into a single, disciplined, and terrifyingly powerful nation. But this unification was not the endgame. It was merely the beginning. He had forged a weapon. Now, he was about to turn that weapon on the rest of the world. With the steppes coiled behind him like a serpent, Genghis Khan unleashed his armies upon the great, ancient civilizations that bordered his new empire. What followed was a campaign of conquest so vast, so swift, and so brutal that it permanently scarred the psyche of the medieval world. This wasn't just warfare. It was a symphony of slaughter, a form of psychological terror designed to shatter the will of any who dared to resist. The first major civilization to feel the full, unrestrained fury of the Mongol storm was the Khwarazmian Empire, a rich and powerful Muslim state spanning modern-day Iran, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. It controlled key arteries of the legendary Silk Road. At first, Genghis Khan sought trade, not war. In 1218, he sent a large caravan of merchants and envoys to the frontier city of Otrar. But the city's governor, a man named Inalkut, was suspicious. Accusing the merchants of espionage, he arrested them. With the approval of the Khwarazmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II, the entire caravan was executed, its riches plundered. Even then, the Khan offered a path away from the abyss. He sent a second delegation, 3 envoys, to demand that the governor be handed over for punishment. In a final, catastrophic act of arrogance, Shah Muhammad II had the head of the delegation, a Muslim, beheaded. He then had the beards of the 2 Mongol envoys shaved off, a sign of profound humiliation, and sent them back to their master. It was an insult that could not be borne. The sacred status of an ambassador had been violated. The Chronicles tell us that when Genghis Khan received the news, he climbed a mountain, prayed in silence for 3 days, and vowed to unleash a vengeance that would shake the very foundations of the earth. In 1219, the storm broke. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire was a masterclass in military strategy and unrestrained savagery. The Shah, fearing his own army, had made a fatal error. He had dispersed his forces among his major cities. Genghis Khan, leading an army estimated to be between 90,000 and 200,000 strong, did the opposite. He divided his forces, striking multiple targets at once, a web of death that overwhelmed the scattered garrisons. The great cities of the Silk Road, jewels of Islamic art and scholarship, fell one by one into the inferno. At Bukhara, contemporary accounts tell a horrifying story. The Mongols rounded up local civilians and used them as human shields, driving them forward to fill the city's moat with their bodies and absorb the defenders' arrows. After the city fell, the remaining garrison was methodically slaughtered. Genghis Khan himself is said to have entered the city's main mosque, climbed the pulpit, and declared to the terrified city leaders that he was the punishment of God, sent for their great sins. While this exact quote is more securely attributed to a later conqueror, Timur, the sentiment perfectly captured the apocalyptic terror the Mongols inspired. Next was Samarkand, a city famed for its magnificent gardens and turquoise domes. Here again, the Mongols employed their brutal cunning. After feigning a retreat to lure part of the garrison into the open, they turned and annihilated them. When the city surrendered, the promise of mercy was broken. The surviving soldiers were executed. The civilian population was herded onto a plain outside the walls, where countless thousands were massacred. Artisans and craftsmen were spared, but only to be deported and redistributed across the vast Mongol territories slaves to the new empire. Everyone else was disposable. The fate of Gurganj, the old Khwarazmian capital, was even more horrific. After a long and bitter siege, the city was taken. The Persian chronicler Juvaini recorded the order for a wholesale massacre. He reports a staggering, almost unbelievable calculation. 50,000 Mongol soldiers were each tasked with executing 24 citizens. The resulting death toll would have been 1.2 million people. Modern historians rightly see such numbers as impossible hyperbole, but they reveal a different kind of truth. They speak to a level of destruction so absolute that it shattered the language of the people who witnessed it. To complete the city's damnation, Mongol engineers reportedly diverted the Amu Darya River to flood the ruins, an attempt to physically wipe the city from memory, though nature and later changes in the river's course would also contribute to the site's decline. But perhaps the most infamous atrocity of the entire campaign, the one that would become a benchmark for human cruelty, occurred at Nishapur. The campaign in this region was led by Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tului. During an earlier siege of the city, Takukar, Genghis Khan's beloved son-in-law, had been killed by an archer's arrow from the city walls. When Nishapur finally fell to Tului in April 1221, the revenge was absolute. The legend that grew from the city's ashes is a vision from hell. It said that Genghis Khan's widowed daughter demanded the extermination of every living thing in the city, so that no creature would survive where her husband had died. What followed was a methodical, industrial-scale slaughter. The population was herded into the open and systematically butchered. Men, women, children, no one was spared, to ensure no one was hiding. Feigning death among the piles of bodies, every corpse was reportedly beheaded. The skulls of men, women, and children were then piled into separate, grisly pyramids. One medieval account, likely another extreme exaggeration meant to convey the sheer scale of the horror, placed the death toll at 1.7 million. The legend insists that even the city's cats and dogs were slaughtered. The city was then razed to the ground, and barley was sown over the land where it once stood, a symbolic act to ensure it would never rise again. While modern scholars view the most vivid details as legendary embellishments, they reflect the undeniable reality of a massacre so terrible it became a whisper of doom for centuries. These were not random acts of violence. This was a calculated strategy. Terror was a weapon, and Genghis Khan was its master. By making a chilling example of cities that resisted, he encouraged others to surrender without a fight. The message was simple and brutally effective: submit, and you might be spared to serve the empire; resist, and you will be annihilated, your civilization turned to dust, your people a forgotten nightmare. This campaign of terror reached its zenith with the destruction of the Western Jia kingdom. The Tangut people of this empire had initially submitted as vassals but later refused to provide troops for his campaigns. For this act of defiance, Genghis Khan vowed their complete destruction. On his final campaign from 1225 until his death in 1227, he led his armies against them with the explicit goal of wiping their state from the map. It was a campaign of relentless slaughter, a dynastic annihilation of unprecedented severity. Scholars still debate whether the modern term genocide applies, but the result was the same. The Tangut civilization was so devastated that for centuries, it was believed to be almost completely lost to history. The man who was once an abandoned child had become the master of extermination. He left behind a trail of ghost empires and cities of the dead. This is the Genghis Khan of our nightmares. The destroyer of worlds, the builder of skull pyramids, the man whose very name became synonymous with conquest and slaughter. And every part of that story is rooted in a terrifying historical truth. His armies did burn cities. His campaigns did result in the deaths of millions. He did preside over acts of collective punishment so vast they beggar belief. Based on this evidence alone, it would be easy to label him a monster and close the book. But that is not the whole story. To do so would be to miss the most unsettling paradox of all. The man who unleashed this hell on earth was also a revolutionary lawgiver and a nation builder of breathtaking vision. To stop at the gates of Nishapur is to see the conqueror, but miss the architect. To understand the real Genghis Khan, the figure who truly changed the world, we have to look past the blood and ashes. We have to examine the laws he created for his own people, because the rules he forged for the Mongols stand in shocking, almost unbelievable, contrast to the ruin he brought upon his enemies. While his armies were tearing down the old world, Genghis Khan was meticulously building a new one, governed by a set of principles that were, in many ways, extraordinarily progressive for the 13th century. The foundation of this new order was a legal code, known as the Yasa. No complete, original text of the Yasa survives today. What we know comes from fragments and descriptions recorded by later historians. But these fragments paint a picture of a code designed to enforce absolute obedience, bind the Mongol people together, and ruthlessly stamp out the chaos that had defined his youth. Many of the Yasa's reported provisions seem torn directly from his own life story. He is said to have banned the theft of livestock, making it punishable by death, a foundational law for social stability in a world where a man's wealth was his herd. Another reported law forbade the kidnapping or enslavement of any Mongol. Another prohibited the abduction of women. It's hard not to see the ghost of his stolen wife Bart in these statutes. Adultery was also reportedly a capital offense for both parties, a brutal law designed to prevent the blood feuds that could rip clans apart. Beyond these social laws, the Yasa was the engine of the Mongol military machine. It demanded absolute, unquestioning discipline. One reported rule stated that if a soldier dropped something from his horse, the man riding behind him had to dismount and retrieve it or face death himself, a stark lesson in collective responsibility. Desertion, or failing to aid a comrade in battle, was an automatic death sentence. These weren't just rules, they were the ligaments holding the Mongol army together, turning nomadic horsemen into the most disciplined fighting force on the planet. But perhaps the most startling aspect of Genghis Khan's rule was his policy on religion. He himself was a follower of Tengrism, the shamanistic belief of the steppes that revered the eternal sky. Yet, he never forced his beliefs on his subjects. In an age of holy war, from the Crusades in the Middle East to sectarian conflicts across Asia, Genghis Khan laid the groundwork for religious freedom. He understood, on a brutally pragmatic level, that persecuting people for their faith was a recipe for rebellion. Buddhist monks, Christian priests, and Muslim imams were all reportedly exempted from taxes. He often invited religious leaders to his court to engage in debates, not to prove one right, but out of a genuine curiosity to learn from them. This pragmatism was the core of his empire. He and his successors knew that the lifeblood of their vast domain was trade. They secured and protected the trade routes that crisscrossed their empire, most famously the Silk Road. They established the ***, a revolutionary relay system of stations with fresh horses, food, and lodging for official messengers, envoys, and merchants. This system, a kind of medieval pony express, allowed people and information to travel across the empire with unprecedented speed and safety. Merchants were given special medallions called ***Pesa** that acted as imperial passports, granting them protection and access to the ***. This period of stability, often called the ***Pax Mongolica** or Mongol peace, ushered in an era of extraordinary cross-cultural exchange. It was a peace bought with an ocean of blood, but it was a peace nonetheless. It dramatically accelerated the flow not just of goods like silk and spices, but of ideas and technologies. Gunpowder, the magnetic compass, printing techniques, their journey westward was sped along these Mongol-protected roads. Science, medicine, and mathematics flowed in both directions. The world became smaller and more connected, all under the watchful, terrifying eye of the Mongol Khans. And at the heart of this society, Mongol women held a status and enjoyed rights that were virtually unheard of in many of the civilized cultures the Mongols conquered. In an era when foot binding was practiced in China and women's lives were heavily restricted in settled societies across Europe and the Middle East, Mongol women could own and inherit property, could divorce their husbands, and played significant roles in public life. With the men so often away on brutal campaigns, it was the women who ran the homeland, managed the herds, and were the economic engine of the empire. The wives and mothers of the Khans in particular wielded immense influence. After the death of Genghis' son and successor Gigedai, it was Gigedai's wife Tregin who ruled the entire Mongol Empire as regent for 5 critical years. Elite women were advisors, administrators, and key players in the deadly politics of succession. While it was still a patriarchal society, Mongol women possessed a degree of agency and authority that would have been unthinkable to many of their counterparts in Persia or China. This was the empire Genghis Khan built, an empire whose internal laws of order, meritocracy, and tolerance stood as a chilling mirror image to its external policy of terror and annihilation. So, we are left staring into the abyss of a profound and disturbing contradiction. How do we reconcile the man who ordered the annihilation of Nishapur with the man who created the Yasa? How can the warlord who presided over some of the most horrific massacres in history also be the architect of the ***Pax Mongolica***, a system that fostered an unprecedented era of communication and exchange? Was he a barbarian who just happened to be a genius? Was his legal code merely a tool to sharpen his military machine? Or was he a genuine visionary who believed in creating a just and orderly world for his own people, while viewing all outsiders who resisted him as nothing more than obstacles to be erased by any means necessary? There are no easy answers. Genghis Khan was a product of a violent, unforgiving world, and he reshaped that world through an even greater, more focused violence. He was both a destroyer and a creator. His conquests brought death and devastation on a scale that is difficult to fathom. The true number of the dead is lost to history, fought over by historians, but even the most conservative estimates are staggering, suggesting his campaigns may have led to a demographic catastrophe. Yet, his unification of the Mongol tribes ended a century of constant, low-level warfare on the steppe. His empire, which reached its greatest extent under his successors, brought order from chaos and laid the groundwork for a century of relative peace across Eurasia. His legacy, is one of fire and blood, but also of law and connection. He is the conqueror who burned cities, but also the ruler whose laws, in some respects, offered more protection to his people than those of the supposedly more civilized societies he overthrew. He remains one of history's most complex and terrifying figures, a man who defies easy categorization as either hero or villain. He was perhaps something far more unsettling, a force of nature that swept away an old world and, in its place, built the foundations of a new one. But what do you think? Was Genghis Khan's apocalyptic brutality a necessary evil for the order he created, or does it forever define him as one of history's greatest monsters? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is the kind of dark, complex history we explore every week here at History's Chronicles of Horror. If you found this journey into the heart of darkness fascinating, be sure to execute the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the simple narratives of the past. Thank you for watching.